So I'm going to be presenting on doing some memory forensics on a live RAM capture with Volatility. It's a cool tool I found and been messing around a bit with. Oh, there we go. So who am I? I'm Alec Miller. I'm a second-year BSMS and a psych minor. I'm pretty interested in incident response and forensics type stuff, and big fan of the furry creatures of all types. So basically just an overview of what memory forensics is. So forensics in general is just looking at a system and the files on it and what you can find and trying to trace through what happened on the system. But memory forensics specifically is looking at the RAM capture of the computer. So, after an incident, if you take a live RAM capture before the computer shuts off, then you can look at what was happening on the system in RAM. These captures are usually a lot smaller than like full file captures, especially for bigger servers like storage that might pop up in incidents. So then you can kind of start incident response faster while waiting for those live disk captures and kind of get a faster response. It mostly focuses on like running processes rather than static files because you can look at the full file system on a hard disk capture. And some malware will actually only load into RAM, and you can't find that on file systems at all, so this can be used to help find those kinds of malware as well. So in terms of actually getting a RAM dump from a computer, kind of the industry standard tool is FTK Imager. It's cross-platform, just a GUI tool. You go and you just click capture memory, really straightforward. You can also save the page files. That's an option, which is like overflow RAM onto an actual file. There's also some other alternatives like the PMEM suite. They've got different CLI tools for the different operating systems. So that's also an option. So Volatility itself, it's a command line tool. It's written in Python. It comes in two different versions, Volatility 2, which is written in Python 2, and Volatility 3. Python 2 is deprecated, so Volatility 2 is also deprecated at this point, but Volatility works based off of plugins. And at this point, Volatility 2 still has some plugins and some functionality that isn't available in Volatility 3 yet. So it's useful to know how to use both, and you can have both installed on your system and use them independently. So it's good to just have both in case you need something with Volatility 2. So it uses these plugins to run different methods on .mem files, which is how FTK Imager saves the files. The majority of the plugins focus on Windows. The functionality for Linux and Mac captures is more limited, but there are options, but it works best for Windows. So just some comparisons here. Volatility 3 has fewer plugins. Another thing that Volatility 3 added was auto-detecting operating system profiles. So Volatility 2, you have to go through and figure out which kind of profile to run the plugins on because different operating systems and different versions will impact how the tool needs to parse the operating system. But in Volatility 3, that function is kind of automated. So just like there's a lot more plugins than these. There are hundreds of plugins. So there's kind of three main categories of functions that you can do. You can kind of scan the RAM, look for certain things. You can dump out files, processes, and hashes. And then there's some other kind of miscellaneous plugins like looking through command line history. VolShell is an interesting kind of subpart of Volatility as a tool. It's a way to interactively interact with the memory file itself, so it kind of opens up a kind of pseudo shell into the RAM and lets you navigate around there. That's kind of beyond the scope of this presentation, but it's interesting to mess around with. So just kind of gonna walk through some of the different plugins and how that looks and what you can do with that. I'm gonna be looking at the Volatility 3 plugins just to, for brevity's sake. But some general tips, you can look at the different profiles for Volatility 2 with that command. You're looking at info and then just scrubbing for a profile. Oh, I'm sorry. And in terms of actually determining the operating system profile, you use KDBG scan, which looks through for various signatures to try to find the correct one that matches. There's also an image info, which is kind of a quicker way to scan for it, but it's less thorough and might not give the accurate profile, so I recommend using that one. And for Volatility 3, you can get kind of basic operating information using the info plugin. And kind of in terms of general syntax, they're similar but a little bit different. So with Volatility 2, you specify your profile and then the plugin you want to use and then your memory file. In Volatility 3, you specify the file first, and then the kind of syntax for the plugins in Volatility 3 is like the operating system, so either Windows, Linux, or OS, Mac, and then the plugin in lowercase, and then the plugin in camel case. I'm not exactly sure why they did it that way, but that's kind of how that syntax works. All the commands for volatility, especially on large memory captures, will be very, very verbose. So save these over to a file so you can parse through them and send them over to other people if you're working on this with a team. So definitely redirect that output. So this is kind of the output of that scan that I was mentioning before. So this profile right there, that's how volatility indicates the different profiles. So that's kind of what you're looking for and how you would specify that profile. It provides a lot of very detailed information, but that's really what you need in order to get Volatility 2 working. So PSList, what this does is it dumps out all the processes that it can find in RAM. So you can go through and look at kind of what processes are running on the computer. You can grep for certain things that you think might be happening and see if they are there. Like you can see here, there's a command line running, you've got FTK imager running, browser, and that can be used to find kind of suspicious things. There's also a couple of variants of this. There's PSScan, which I believe is Volatility 2 only, which kind of goes through more thoroughly, because what this does is it's kind of tracking through a linked list of different processes, but if malware is low down enough in the system, it can unlink processes from that chain and use that to evade this kind of tool that checks that chain. But PSScan looks for the specific signatures and will find that regardless of whether or not it's on the chain or not. There's also PSTree, which operates similarly to like tree directory structures, where it shows the parent structure, the parent process, and all the child processes. So you can see something like, you know, SVC host might be running, and that's a perfectly legitimate service, but there might be some sub-processes of that that got hijacked that you wouldn't necessarily see in this output, but that would show up in a tree output. There's NetScan, which, again, does exactly what it sounds like. It looks for various open ports. You can look for things that are listening, things that shouldn't be open, so depending on the kind of server you have, you might not want to have ports like 443 or 80 open. And then if they are open, that could be considered suspicious and give you a place to look for, okay, well, what process would be using that port? Why is that port open? Things like that. File scan, so this is kind of looking through the files that are in RAM and that are kind of currently loaded. So in this example, you know, there's a lot of DLLs. DLLs kind of form the bulk of this output, but you can kind of grep for specific things. You can grep for EXEs, you can grep for images in this case, text files, anything that you might have reason to look for. And then this is one of the dump plugins, so you can use this to dump files. So that's the JPEG that was loaded into RAM. It's the wallpaper of the VM that this was captured from. So you can use that to actually extract files from RAM without needing the file system capture at all. So that could definitely come in handy, especially if it's not possible to get a file system capture. So hash dump, this operates kind of similarly to Mimikatz in how it extracts hashes from RAM, and so this could be used to extract hashes. And in an incident response type capacity, you probably wouldn't want to be cracking these hashes, but from an offensive perspective, if you could get a memory dump of a file system, you could use this to get those hashes and use something like Hashcat to crack those. So that's pretty interesting. Command line, this is showing kind of what is being operated on the command line. It's mostly services and processes running their own commands, but if there was an adversary using command line on your system, then those commands would also show up in this output. And that could be a way to kind of track the history of what they were doing on the system, as it couldn't be deleted. Yeah, a little bit of a short presentation, but questions, if there are any. Yeah.
Have you tried using this offensively at all?
Not really. So one of the first kind of exposure that I had to this tool was a CTF problem where we were given a memory dump. So we had to go through that and look. I believe the flag for that challenge was hidden in a file that you had to extract from RAM. So kind of in that capacity of searching through, trying to look for things.
Or was volatility recommended, or was that like
Mm-mm.
that's the one?
I think it was just Google. What do you do with a memory capture? Because I'd never seen this kind of file type before. Yeah. Yeah. Wouldn't recommend trying to read a memory capture.
Do you find that that's like easy? I don't know what other options there are, but do you think that was probably one of the easiest ones to use?
Yeah, volatility is definitely one of the primary tools in this area. I think there's a couple of kind of more corporate style tools, but volatility is definitely one of the forerunners for that. Cool. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about going into like digital forensics in the future, solving the CTF challenge? Because I personally think memory forensics is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my interest areas. So, yeah, it's.
Cool, Alec.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
You're good.